Hi, and welcome to this week's episode. This week, we are going to talk a little bit about business and disabilities and the impact of COVID. So, I think it's fair to say that from the onset and spread of COVID-19, few, if not any, have been left unaffected. Governments the world over have been repeatedly tested and stretched as they begin to re-establish confidence and give economies a chance of survival. So, less noticed and discussed, however, is the impact of the pandemic on entrepreneurial businesses. As sources of finance dry up, more than 40% of new ventures will fall into the so-called red zone with only enough cash for 3 months or less of normal operations. So this got me thinking about the actual link between people with disabilities or learning disabilities and entrepreneurship. So did did you know that there's a strong correlation between entrepreneurship and learning disabilities? In Ireland, there are under 650,000 people with a disability of just over 13% of the population. Of these, just 17,654 people with disabilities are self-employed and have employees. There are a further 34,461 people with disabilities who are self-employed and have no employees. To bring that a little bit wider out, in the US, it's estimated that there are over a third of entrepreneurs who have some form of learning disability, which is nearly 35% of US entrepreneurs suffer from dyslexia, for example. That's more than double the rate in the general population. In Australia, people with learning disabilities have a rate of entrepreneurship which is 50% higher than the average within the population. So at first glance, these numbers might point to an optimistic conclusion that suggests learning disabilities make you better suited to entrepreneurship, and I think that's probably a little bit of a false flag conclusion. If we dig a little bit deeper, it seems a lot of people with learning disabilities are forced into self-employment because the regular workplace is a terrible fit. Over the last 10, 15 years, certainly when I was growing up in the 1980s, I think workplaces were not the most suitable of places, but I think there has been a lot of great progress made across many different industries to incorporate people with physical disability, and certainly there's a lot more understanding about invisible disabilities. Speaking to Peter Knight, who's the CEO of Check Free, who has ADD, attention deficit disorder, he says that he would have had great difficulty if he had gotten into a staff job. He certainly knew that, and that's why he started his own company. He was fearful to the point of being paranoid that he would end up working in a big company. So with the traditional work avenue unsuitable, starting his own job seemed to be the most simple and best answer. But how effective are entrepreneurs with learning disabilities? The research would suggest that there's a set of key problem solving or deductive skill sets that entrepreneurs with learning disabilities over index at. And I'm just going to go through a few of them here. So the first one would be spatial reasoning. A greater ability to visualize and solve problems known as spatial reasoning, which aids skill sets in engineering and filmmaking. Richard Branson's Made by Dyslexia group is doing pretty terrific work in this area. And of course, Richard Branson himself has got dyslexia. I think he's very vocal and very open about that. The next one will be verbal reasoning. So stronger verbal reasoning capabilities enable entrepreneurs to connect seemingly disconnected ideas, i.e. finding different analogies or connections between certain solutions. The CEO of Kinko, Paul Orfila, has said that his learning style helped him see the big picture and not to worry about the tiny details. The next one will be narrative reasoning. So this is for people who have great memory for personal experiences and can be particularly helpful in such careers as poets, essayists, memoirists, and other writers such as Paul Schultz and John Irvine would be good examples. Dynamic reasoning. So this is the ability to reason in novel situations. This is helpful for businesses or also those in the scientific field. Jack Horner, for example, would be a good one, and also indeed Albert Einstein would have had, we believe, pretty fantastic dynamic reasoning skills. So supplementing this is the following key areas which entrepreneurs with learning disabilities have been shown to have a statistically significant advantage compared to those that don't. So the first one is financial success. Psychologists who have analysed the mental makeup of business winners found that learning difficulties are one of the most important precursors of financial success. Indeed, Richard Branson has gone on record to say that his dyslexia has made him a better business owner, primarily because it showed him how to delegate tasks that he wasn't so good at, which allowed him to see the bigger picture of growing his business. The other key area would be in resilience, so coping strategies that have been used since childhood offset their weaknesses in written communication and organizational skills, and they've nurtured the ability to identify trustworthy people and handing over major responsibilities to them. The final one would be the big picture thinking. Entrepreneurs with learning disabilities have an inherent aptitude for tunnel vision and big picture thinking, and indeed there's a bit of a cross correlation happening with learning disabilities, but our biggest learning has been that learning disabilities drive people to entrepreneurship at a greater rate due to the obstacles in the traditional job market. But once they get there, more often than not, they thrive. So whilst there certainly are drawbacks to having learning disabilities as an entrepreneur, namely the inevitable overwhelmingness of it all, founders often lack a strong enough social support system, which can lead to further isolation. The anxiety that isolation can create often makes things like fundraising and networking events difficult or even painful for some founders with social disabilities. But still, entrepreneurs with learning disabilities can build deeply sympathetic and a family-oriented culture that helps to encourage and support innovative problem solving and out-of-the-box thinking. And they can certainly bring a lot of focus and vigilance to challenges that others can't. So, whilst a learning disability can be a debilitating burden, especially when it goes undiagnosed, the coping mechanisms that our brain develops to work around our own particular learning issues can build muscle in other parts of our brains, and these muscles seem remarkably well suited for the life of an entrepreneur. So, on a more broader sense, whilst many startups will fail to survive the COVID crisis, the pandemic has also given rise to new and more entrepreneurial activity, as it always does in times of crisis. A reminder for us to reconsider how we value innovation in entrepreneurial systems. The question we are faced with today is how this will influence us going forward and what can be done to different players to make sure we move in the right direction. So how will the experience of the thousands of entrepreneurs who will potentially lose their jobs during the pandemic impact the perception of entrepreneurship? Will the decades of efforts made to enhance this environment and diversify our economies through government and private funding and education be undermined? Or do you believe that this is perhaps the shake-up that was needed to restructure the system? Certainly, I would love if you were able to give us your thoughts and provide us some feedback, or indeed if you indeed are an entrepreneur and you have some type of learning disability. I would love if you're able to get in contact with us, and perhaps you can come onto the podcast and discuss the challenges and successes or struggles that you have had. So that finishes this week's episode. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.